Hi, it's Tuesday. It's July 27th. It is noon time, and we know by now it's the Maine Take. Hi, and welcome to our program for this week. My name is Dana Connors. I'm pleased to be the host of this program, brought to you twice a month, the same time, on the same day, every other week. We are pleased, frankly, to have this opportunity to provide you with the timely information of our people, our policies, our programs that work in our state, to help keep you up to date and informed on the issues affecting you, your lives, and your livelihood. Today's show will do, we hope, exactly that. Through the lens of our advocacy team here at the Chamber, Peter Gore, Ben Gilman, and Linda Caprara, we'll be taking a look back to the work of the 130th as they have just concluded the first session of the biennium. And we'll also take a glimpse as to what lies ahead for the shorter session next year. At the same time, or not at the same time, but also on the program, we are pleased to share with you an interview with Senator Collins that was taped just about a little over an hour ago. And as you will see, she demonstrates once again a key leadership role in the issue of the moment, our infrastructure bill. You've read a lot about it. Now you're going to hear from a person that has a very key role to play in its outcome. But at the same time, take note of her leadership during this entire pandemic in the ways that she has helped our people, our businesses, dealing with the programs that they need and the issues that must be addressed to not only survive, but to succeed in the time that we're in today as we seek economic recovery. So let's begin with that interview, and I would ask for the tape to begin. Hello, Senator Collins, and thank you so much for being with us today. We know that the topic is really the infrastructure and perhaps the earmarks if we have time, because I know how precious your time is and all that you're doing on our behalf. But before we go there, I just want to take a minute to express to you the fact that I hope you know how much we really appreciate your steadfast efforts and the success that your advocacy has brought to our state. Clearly, the pandemic has brought an historic test to our state for our people, our businesses, and our overall economy. But I've got to say that your leadership has been instrumental in helping us through those difficult times, witnessed incredibly so by the programs that you have been a leader in, all of them, from the CARES Act, particularly the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a tremendous boost to our businesses here in the state, but also the ARPA funds that have really made a difference. And clearly today's subject, which you clearly have been steadfast and tireless in trying to bring to a successful conclusion. So thank you for all that. I want to be sure I say it and time doesn't run out and I don't get that chance. So I begin with that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dana. I can't imagine anyone who has a better appreciation of the infrastructure needs of our state than you do as a former commissioner of the Department of Transportation. And that's when we first started working very closely together. And I'm pleased to say that I've had an excellent relationship with Maine's DOT commissioner since then. Yeah. And Bruce Van Note and I work very closely together as well. And that's what we're trying to mirror here in Congress. We have brought together 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. So I'm one of those 5 Republicans. And we have been working literally night and day, weekends, for the past month, but really intensified in the last 2 weeks to try to get this package done. And it would be $579 billion in new investments in what I would call core infrastructure. Roads, bridges, waterways, seaports, airports, water and sewer treatment plants, our electric grid. It focuses on what I think most of us would consider core infrastructure with one very important modern addition, and that is expanding broadband so that we get broadband services in the most rural parts of our state and our country. We've learned through the pandemic just how important that is.
Oh, absolutely. And all those items that you spoke of or elements within the bill that you've just described really does speak to the heart and soul of Maine people, because the infrastructure bond issues year after year have 70 to 75 to close to 80% approval every time. So people of Maine really do understand the value of infrastructure, how it serves our economy, provides jobs. So we so appreciate the fact that you're not only hanging in there, that you're a leader in that respect. You're right. In the past few days, I think since the 22nd, it seems like every day we get a new report on what seems to be a new challenge that you're facing as part of that select group. Where do we stand today on the 27th?
Well, we met last night again, and I had a dinner at the Canadian Embassy last night that I broke away for because we have so many important issues with Canada. I'm delighted Canada's finally reopening its border, but perplexed that we're not matching it on the American side. And of course, there's stuff with lumber disputes and other issues with our closest allies and friends, the Canadians. And then I went back to working on infrastructure, worked on it all weekend, including Saturday night as well. And we've been, what has happened is on Sunday night, the White House put a completely new offer on the table that I actually believe was Senator Schumer's offer, because we had reached an agreement with the White House last week, the 10 of us, on probably 90% of the issues. There were some transit and rail issues outstanding and some broadband issues outstanding. But other than tweaks here and there, we pretty much had reached an agreement on 90% of the package. Then lo and behold, there's this brand new offer that comes Sunday night. So that very much surprised and disappointed us. So we had meetings all day yesterday and to try to work this out. But there are many of us who think that it's not really right in the 11th hour to try to reopen issues that had been settled. Tweaking them, sure. That you always learn some new facts as you go along. There are also some issues with how we pay for the package and to pay for as much of it as we can. Although I would argue this is an investment over 5 to 10 years in our economy. And I don't view it as inflationary because it is really it's not on the demand side, the way giving people additional financial aid and unemployment is, for example, which has been a problem for a lot of Maine employers who are now opened up and ready to hire and having difficulties in doing so. So the economists tell us that this will not be inflationary. It leads to long-term increases in productivity and safety as well. It will allow us to deliver people and products more efficiently and to improve and upgrade our water systems. I'm working to make sure PFAS is included because we've had contamination on dairy farms in Maine and also some public water supplies in central Maine with PFAS, those forever chemicals. So that's important as well. But right now, we're still trying to plow ahead We've got many more meetings scheduled for today. I met with the White House yesterday. I had White House calls over the weekend, and we're trying to get it done, but time is growing short.
Yeah. Scheduled for what? We got August recess around the 1st or 9th or so of the month. Not that you wouldn't stay in, but the fact of the matter remains is that it is a short time period. You have to, I have to ask this question, as unfair as it may sound, is that when you have these last minute offers, so to speak, is that in any way to be interpreted by some of us that they don't really want this to go, or what can you conclude from that? Because it just seems so, it's such bad faith when you're trying to negotiate something that's so important for our economy and our people. To do that it's an obvious signal. What is that signal?
It does raise the question about whether there are some people who simply don't want us to get an agreement. They don't want a bipartisan deal. They don't want us to take this section where there is bipartisan support out of the broader, enormously expensive spending and tax increase extravaganza that we'll be turning to next. I think that there are some people who believe that if infrastructure is taken out, that perhaps there are some moderate Democrats who might oppose the spending spree package. There's some good things in the spending spree package, but $3.5 trillion added to our debt, the largest tax increases in history. That's not what our economy needs. So it does raise the question about whether some people simply don't want this to occur. We've had criticism on the right as well as on the left, I would note. And then there's some legitimate changes. There's some numbers that is the Office of Management and Budget has consulted more closely with the agencies. It turns out there's more money in one account than we thought, less than another, because we want to take some of the unused COVID funds where the programs have closed and repurpose that money to help keep the costs down for our $579 billion infrastructure package. So I think it's a combination, but I can't help but think that there's some people who are just trying to sink this package. And I'm determined not to let that happen. Let me make clear, I actually don't think the president is one of those people. I think he wants a bipartisan package because he campaigned on that. That's what he promised in his inaugural address, and that's what he has told me personally. But there are people around the president, and there's the Senate Democratic leader who may well have an interest in sinking the package. So,
well, that becomes so evident, though, when I realizing that when you read an article, you draw a conclusion that may not be absolutely accurate, but nevertheless, when you see that, I think I read this concerning a clip yesterday where Senator Schumer was saying that in addition to adding that, whatever it was, 15 billion or so to the package, he also wanted to be sure that we also had a vote for the 3.5 that you were just speaking of. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. I mean, that sounds to me like bad faith. That sounds to me like you don't want this program. It is complicated, but it is also very, very important. And like I said at the outset, we can't thank you enough for your tireless effort, because it is important to our state. And it's the one that, in addition to the Paycheck Protection Program, and not to diminish any of the others that have been passed so far in any way, but clearly the infrastructure is something that Maine people don't have issues with. They identify, think of the things you just said, our roads, our bridges, our broadband. I mean, there are so many things there that people can immediately relate to. Plus, I know I'm borrowing time from you, which I apologize for, but The delegation has come together for 150 million of earmarks. That's fantastic for our state. And it pretty much touches all of our communities, or most of our communities, from Kittery to St. John Valley. That's pretty remarkable as well.
Exactly. And I've always been one that thought that you could do earmarks in a responsible way. You should have to put your name on it. It should be for a nonprofit or a government entity, a community, for example. And it should have, I require 3 letters of support, also from community groups or from other interested parties, to make sure that it has community support. But, back when we had earmarks 10 years ago, I was able to secure 2 that made a real difference. There were many, but 2 stand out for me. One is to buy the equipment for Northern Maine Community College to establish a precision machinist program. Well, all they needed was that additional investment in the equipment. They have a 100% placement rate. The second example I would give you is the Kennebec Valley Community College. Again, they wanted to start a radiological technician program, couldn't afford the equipment. That's all they needed. The hospitals were happy to pay for the tuition for the people to extend. Again, a 100% placement rate. Now, to me, those are ideal earmarks. They're a one-time federal investment that starts a program where there's a real need and creates jobs. And just a week ago, I was in Searsport. I talked about their need to do some dredging, which they've come up with a very innovative way to take the silt and use it with concrete to make a pad at the port in Searsport, and also to revitalize their downtown. And that's when it makes you feel really good, and you realize, I'm going to push hard for all of my earmarks. I obviously won't get all of them. We're limited in the amount. But those that I do secure, I know will make a real difference to the quality of life, to job creation, and to community and economic development.
No, I totally agree. From my years at DOT and even subsequent, the examples that you mentioned are perfect examples, is that there is a role for earmarks. It just needs those guidelines, those conditions that need to be met, because it's hard to address many issues within the operating programs that exist. So this provides that avenue. And again, I know I've taken more time, and you're so gracious to give it to me with all the things you're doing on our behalf, but I'll end as I began, and that is to thank you. Your leadership is amazing in terms of serving our state and our people. We thank you for all that. We know that you'll never give in or never give up, and your leadership speaks to that. So thank you, Senator. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dana. And let me again say, I so appreciate your input and the input of your staff and your members as we go through this process. It's been invaluable. Thanks so much.
You're very kind. Thank you. Take care. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. We do thank you, Senator. As we said, your role, your leadership, and the success that you bring to our state is most notable, and we thank you. Now let's turn our attention to our own capital and the first year of the 130th legislature as it came to a close about a week and a day ago. And I'm going to ask our team, you've met them before because we brought to you on a regular basis the progress or lack thereof of the session. And this will really anticipate to wrap up the session for this year, at least at this time. So our staff, to remind you once again, in case you missed our opening, is Peter Gore, Ben Gilman, and Linda Caprara. And let me begin by just putting it into context very quickly. And that is, I think we all agree that this has been a very difficult, very challenging session. And it kind of endured during this session in terms of the challenges, both in terms of the process that we've talked about before, but also the process, the policies, I should say, that were brought forward for consideration, how they would impact our economy, slow down economic recovery. But now with the closure, with the adjournment, and as we reflect back on the session, before we take a look at the second year of the 130th, let's just focus on this year at the moment. As we look back, was it as bad as it could have been? Did we have some successes that we need to talk about? So let's begin there. Less about the process. We've talked a lot about that. Let's talk about the policies. First of all, what could have been, and then what was. So Peter, you want to kick it off?
Sure thing, Dana. Thank you. When you think about successes, people often think about in the legislative world, passing good pieces of legislation. And I'm not sure we can say, with a couple of exceptions, that a lot of good pieces of legislation passed. But there were some bad pieces of legislation that didn't pass. And that's some of what I worked on. And I think we all had a piece of that. So with the help of a vigorous grassroots outreach that we helped really get moving, in my world, we were able to defeat LD 553, which is the employment at will bill, which would have gotten rid of employment at will and made everything for cause termination. I worked on a lot of other bills this session, but overwhelmingly, that was probably the most important bill for the business community in my area this session. And it was a great success. You know, when you look at the numbers, they certainly weren't with us. But businesses did their part, and they reached out to legislators and let them hear about, you know, the devastation this kind of bill would cause for them individually and for our state and economy. And the legislature was convinced to reject it. So there were others like that as well. Ben, I'm sure you have one or two of those.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And I think as we look at it as successes and losses, that's one way to look at this legislative session, what moved the economy forward. So I kind of put it as, if I looked at my area, like a record of 2-1-1, 2 wins, tie, and potentially a loss. But there's a silver lining even with that loss. When I look at the wins, I think of broadband, the establishment of the Broadband Authority and the expansion of broadband in Maine. Just a few years ago, we were investing about $500,000 a year in expansion of broadband. This year and moving forward in this budget, we're looking north of $120 million. A lot of that money coming from the American Rescue Plan. And that's going to be run through our newly established Maine Broadband Authority. So that's a top issue for the state of Maine, one that was clearly a success of this legislative session. Another success was, like, similar to Peter, stopping bad things, like setting up a new fee on video streaming services in the state of Maine that would have impacted our hospitality industry. It would have had a new regulatory structure. That bill did pass, but the governor supported us on that one, vetoed it, and that veto was sustained. When I talk about a tie, I look at the project labor agreements. And the reason why I call it a tie, there were about 4 pieces of legislation that would have created project labor agreements in the state of Maine. The 2 most egregious ones were defeated. Those would have established project labor agreements on all clean energy projects here in the state, and also on all major investments, roads, bridges, things of that. You think of major projects over $10 million. Both those bills that were really problematic for the state were defeated, but there were 2 smaller bills that did move forward. One dealing with offshore wind, there was a project labor agreement attached to that. And then the other one was affordable housing. It started out as a request of $100 million and some last minute budget wrangling. Ended up with $20 million in the American Rescue Plan funds that are going to be done with a project labor agreement to develop housing. I think we all believe we need more affordable housing in the state of Maine, but attaching a project labor agreement that would eliminate over 90% of Maine's construction industry to work on that is just problematic. So even though the big ones were defeated, a couple did move forward, and I described that kind of that issue area as a tie, so to speak. And then the one place I think we did take a is on the packaging bill, the extended producer responsibility bill that did move forward, LD 1541, and was signed into law. This bill will establish a new fee structure for producers of packaging here in the state of Maine. There is a study that says it's going to increase the average family of 4's grocery bill by about $50 a month, but there is a silver lining in it. The implementation date was pushed out by another year at the last minute to 2024. There is some major substantive rulemaking that got added into that. So it's going to make, for the implementation, I think is going to take a little bit longer. So that was a silver lining, that it wasn't the bill that just passed, that was amended before it finally came out of the Appropriations Committee. So I know there's probably a couple issues, Linda, as well, that we move forward on, and some that, you know, that we didn't. I know we had some
Yeah.
positive taxes.
Yes, there are some positive things in tax this year. Couple of them. LD 730, which is the Pine Tree Zone Development Bill. This is the bill we initiated, and this basically extends the sunset date out. It was expiring this coming December, so it extends it out 2 years. So that's a hugely positive thing for the business community. We've got LD 229, which is the Maine C Capital Tax Credit Bill. This bill basically increases the aggregate and annual amounts that were reduced last year for investments that were made prior to April 1 of 2020. There were investments in the pipeline, and these investments would have been subject to those lowered aggregate and annual amounts. So this restores that for those projects approved by FAME, which is a positive thing. Another one was LD 1713, which is a refundable tax credit for Maine's paper industry. This is a tax credit available to companies that don't qualify for the Pine Tree zones of the New Markets tax credit. Basically, it's a 4% credit over 10 years. If you invest $15 million, you have to be headquartered in Maine. You have to have X number of employees, over 400. So it's a positive thing for that industry, for those companies that can't qualify for some of the other ones. And you also have to be headquartered here in the state of Maine. We defeated a number of bills that were very egregious. One was a local option tax bill, would have imposed a 1% local option tax on prepared foods and lodging if approved by voters in that municipality. Basically, the other one was LD 1598. This would have taken away all companies' tax incentives if they had one labor violation, which was ridiculous. The other one would have lowered the threshold on Maine's estate tax, making more Mainers' estates taxable. This is LD 1524. It went from 5.6 to $2 million. So that was defeated. Another bill, LD 498. This bill would have imposed a 3% surcharge on those folks making over $200,000, irregardless if you were single, married, or married filing separately or jointly. So this was huge. We defeated all those legislation. In addition to that, a corporate income tax bill, LD 501, which would have increased the corporate income tax rate here in the state of Maine from 8.93 to 12.4, making us one of the top in the nation. So those bills, and we also defeated about 7 to 8 income tax bills that were very egregious, that basically increased the rates for individuals. So it was a very busy session.
Yeah, busy is the word for sure. There's also another very positive note, and it's kind of wedged between two efforts that gave us reason to be concerned. Let me explain. We began the session with an uncharacteristic majority vote of an $8.3 billion Part 1 budget, as we call it. We ended the year with a majority vote when we were hoping for a 2/3 vote regarding the plan the governor had put forward with some modifications by the legislature, but that also got caught up in politics and was a majority vote instead of a 2/3, which would have allowed it to go into effect immediately. Wedged between those two was the shining light of the Appropriations Committee, their efforts around a supplemental budget that added $200 million to the 8.3 to bring it to 8.5. But in that supplemental budget were some very major issues, from revenue sharing to $300 for those who return to work, for educational funding, for homestead, for daycare workers. That was agreed to by unanimous vote of appropriations and sent to the legislature and obtained a 2/3 vote that allowed it to go in immediately. That was a shining light that gets lost in both the beginning and the ending. And we hope that that type of effort returns to the future, which it has been characteristic of the past. Now let's jump forward. Let's take a look at the short session, so-called, but not short on issues that we have to deal with next year. Peter, you want to circle back?
Sure thing. Obviously, for starters, everything that the legislature didn't address directly at the end of the legislative session was ultimately carried over, which means all the bills on the Appropriations Committee, et cetera, of which a number of bills I'm watching are part of that. We've already talked about it in the past, 225, the overtime bill, 607, the bill to change, that's the overtime bill. 225 is the cash out of vacation pay, 965, which is the elimination of non-disclosure agreements. 1338, which deals with penalties levied against employers who violate the brand new employment leave law, and 1463, which is a bill that would reinstate the HIT tax, the health insurance tax, on all small group and individual health insurance policies. All those bills are still alive, and they'll all be considered in the next legislative session on top of what's likely to be submitted during cloture and approved by Legislative Council. So there is not going to be a shortage of issues for, on the workplace side for certain in the next legislative session. Ben?
Yeah, thanks. Two bills get carried over on the environmental side that I'd like to just highlight real quickly. One is a bill that will completely rewrite our air emissions licensing here in the state of Maine. And a lot of people think that only impacts, large industrial businesses here in the state. Well, in actuality, there's over 660 air licenses here in the state, and they impact nonprofits, schools, universities, hospitals, to large and medium-sized businesses. There's a bill that will rewrite those completely and have a very large impact. That bill has been carried over by the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. The other bill has to do with the reclassification of the Androscoggin River under the Clean Water Act. It's a really technical bill, but it would impact every business that operates along the Androscoggin River, and also could be, the results of that bill you can see in other parts of the state as well. So that's a carryover bill to keep an eye on. We all want clean water. We all want clean air. And we have those in Maine. And we have a good regulatory structure. These bills might take it a little bit further and create some bad economic development potential in the future. So, Linda, I know there's a couple tax issues out there as well.
Yeah, there's a couple tax issues on tax havens. LD 428. This bill would require Maine corporations to include in their income from other jurisdictions around the globe. This is a perennial bill that happens every 2 years. Congress is considering this issue at the federal level. We approached the sponsor and asked if this could be carried over, and the committee did carry it over in light of what's going to happen potentially this summer at the congressional level. The other one is LD 1337. This is a tax on second homes in the state of Maine. This is a ridiculous bill. This would basically put and impose a 0.5% tax on the assessed value of a home if it's a second home, and basically you would have to prove that you don't inhabit it for less than, if you inhabit it for less than 3 months of the year, you'd be subject to the tax. So it's ridiculous. LD 1704, a state tax bill. This would lower the threshold. I think they carried this bill over because they didn't know what was going to happen with the other bill that died. But this bill would lower the threshold from the 5.6 to $1 million. So it's even worse than the other bill was. LD 1569, it's a water tax bill. This would impose a 5 cent per gallon on water, groundwater extracted for commercial bottling use. They want to study this issue. This is another perennial bill that happens, and the committee wants to take a look at it. Another bill, an income tax bill, did survive, LD 1289. This would basically lower or increase the top Maine's income tax rate from 7.15 to 7.95. They want to again study the rates and look at all the issues. Even though we've testified that the top 1% pay the majority of the tax in the state of Maine. I guess, folks still want to look at it, so they will. One bill I forgot to mention that died very late in the session was LD 1514. This was originally going to get carried over, but it died at the last day, which is a positive thing. This would have basically imposed a 0.5% tax on financial assets over $5 million. This is cash, stocks, bonds, pensions. This was a really egregious bill, but this basically died on the last day. So that's a positive thing. So that's what we're looking at for next year. And there's a lot of other bills that we're monitoring, but those are some of the larger ones.
Yeah, there's so much more to do. As they often say, it's never over until it's over. And that sure applies to the first or the second year of any session. But I do think that what we've learned that helps us this year will serve us next year in the same positive way. So now let's turn to the takeaway for this week. As I've reflected on what our guests have said today, I think the words that I would use that would best describe how I feel at the moment is the words that I think we've all heard before, but sure applies to the time we're in. And that is that we are witnesses to history. and writers of our own destiny. And certainly, I think we all recognize that we are living in an historic time, and it's unfolding before our very eyes. And at the same time, we are writing our own destiny, the essence of what our future will be, our economic success or not, determined by the very actions that we take, by the very decisions we make, at a very time that we are seeking economic recovery from a pandemic that has haunted us for the past 12 to almost 18 months. Well, the program today, in my mind, reinforces those words about as well as I could ever express them, whether it's in the national level at our national capital or here in the state of Maine. Senator Collins kicked it off in a way that is reassuring to let us know that she is on task. She is doing everything she possibly can by her actions, by her decisions, by her leadership, to be sure that Maine is well represented and that our success can be reasonably assured. Back home in our capital here in Maine, we did face a most challenging, difficult session, both in process, but also in the policies that were forwarded. Many of them were anti-business, as you've heard. Many of them would have slowed down our economy. But as you've also been reminded in a previous show, that we should not be judging based upon the input of the types of bills, but on the results. And that's true. This session speaks to that. Whether you're playing offense or defense, it has the same message. And by that message, by that metric, if you're to look at or reflect on what's been told today, yeah, maybe we didn't get everything we wanted, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, or by the words of many of us, not as bad as it could have been. In fact, there were a lot of successes that we should take note of. We also should take note of why and how that happened. I, first of all, would give a lot of credit to the advocacy team here at the State Chamber for their experience, for their knowledge. But I would also say, as they would say, that we don't do it by ourselves. This year proved more than any other that getting the information out in the hands of your members to contact their legislator is vital. Building coalitions with our other organizations, particularly our local and regional chambers, was fundamental to success. The grassroots that we all play collectively was certainly of great value when we saw the results. I also have to give a real shout out to the governor, to Governor Mills and her administration for their openness in terms of communication, as also their collaborative relationships that they established. The vetoes, the 21 vetoes, or unless I've lost count, were a number of those were because of our relationship and the impact it had. And I'm grateful that we had that. Also, not all Democrats were leading that progressive agenda. And certainly the Republicans, even though they were the minority in terms of numbers, they spoke up and were convincing on many of Linda's issues that she spoke of in the tax, but also in the supplemental budget. Yes, there was room for a lot of people. And even though the majority votes started our session and ended our session, that supplemental budget that did so much good is something to take note of as well. The federal programs that we spoke of in the first session were there to help us, and they certainly did. Paycheck Protection Program, and we hope the infrastructure program as well. And the one that was just passed, even by a majority vote, that doesn't go into effect for 90 days. The America's Rescue Plan dollars, that almost $1 billion was important to our state and to our economy. And you know what? The very fact that we had a strategic plan in place to help guide us was instrumental. There's a lot of people to thank. There's a lot to be appreciative of. And there's a lesson that's learned that hopefully will serve us well in the next session, because we'll have a similar challenge before us. But we know that good can come if we come together, if we stay together, and most of all, if we work together. That is the main takeaway for this week. And remember, above all else, in a world where you can be anything, be kind to yourself and to one another. That's the main take for this week. In 2 weeks' time, we'll see you right back here with another program that we hope you will enjoy. Thank you, enjoy, and take care.